So let's segue. You mentioned transparency, and we had a question from Anju who asked, "Is it okay for a leader to apologize? Is it taken as a sign of weakness?" So I'll answer it simply and say yes, it's okay for a leader to apologize, and no, I don't think it's taken as a sign of weakness. I mean, there is, shall we say, sort of an older corporate style that sometimes bleeds into politics of saying, I cannot ever admit being wrong or making a mistake, and I think that just causes so many problems. I blogged about the idea years ago that it actually takes great strength and confidence for a leader to be humble and to listen to others and to admit a mistake. I think there's real strength in that, and I think employees will quickly see through false bravado or a leader who can't ever admit being wrong or can't ever find a reason to apologize. What do you think? I mean, I'm curious in the medical realm even.
Yeah, no, I think that this is it's a great question. I think there was some intent behind the question because I think it's obvious that yes, I think people, when they apologize, they're more likable because they're more of a human versus attempting to be some kind of demigod or something along those lines. I will, and really just to be contrary, I will throw out a time when being the agitator, I think that it probably is a sign of weakness. I think, for example, someone that, let's say, inappropriately sexes or texts with the sexing thing, I don't know how they call that thing, and just does it over and over and over, but keeps apologizing afterwards, you're kind of like, hey, that is actually a sign of weakness, and I can't remember the politician or whatever that has that issue. But I think if you you make a mistake, it was a genuine mistake, and it's not like something that you continually do, and you apologize. That is coming from a place of profound security and profound strength. And I think that's a great attribute as a leader.
Yeah, and you bring it back to workplace. I think if an apology is not a get out of jail free card. If a leader is constantly blaming employees and yelling at them for problems, and then apologizes, and then does the same thing again a couple of days later, the apology, there needs to be reflection and improvement. I think, when I've seen leaders trying to change their approaches, and let's say it's a really rare occurrence when they jump to a conclusion, or they throw out a solution instead of engaging the team. An apology of, I'm sorry, I'm sorry for what I did there. That and I think that's different than the art of the non-apology. Like, I'm sorry if you were offended by that is less of an apology than I'm sorry for blaming the team for that problem. But I think in healthcare it's interesting when you look at apologies. Doctors apologizing when there's an error. A lot of studies have shown that hospitals and doctors who sincerely apologize get sued less often because I think people realize we're all human, mistakes happen. I think it's when people are unwilling to admit a problem where it starts to spiral. I think the idea of the cover-up is sometimes worse than the crime. The aftermath of a simple mistake can get people more upset if there's not an apology.
Yeah, and a little unrelated, but you brought up the kind of the medical, legal, and being a physician. I've taken classes on this. Part of orientation, sometimes part of our residency was related to this. And the statistic that I remember the most is just amazing. That it all has to do with your demeanor and your bedside manner, but some people are far more likely to be sued independent of whether or not a action they did could be attributable to a harm, versus people that do lots of actions that could be attributable harm, depending on their bedside manner, may never get sued. It's almost like an 8-to-1 relationship or something crazy to that effect. Like, really egregious acts get sued on 1 out of 8 times, and then if you look at lawsuits, almost 8 times more, there's really not anything quote, wrong medically that was done. It was just that the people were kind of vile, abrasive, not human-esque doctors, and so but they end up getting sued a lot more in their life, or in their career, I should say. So they can actually see almost within the first year of someone leaving residency, their kind of lawsuit profile is very well established. That if you go through a couple of years and you're not going to get sued, you probably are going to go a long time without that. Most lawsuits, interestingly enough, have to do more with someone's got to pay for a whole bunch of medical bills than anything else, which I think is interesting as well. And then anyway, just we could have literally lectures and lectures and lectures on this as a separate topic within itself. So
sure, maybe you can do a webinar someday.
Oh, interesting.
We have a little bit more time on to plug our KaiNexus webinar series, the presentation webinars, which our next one, actually, I'll mention it, Thursday, October 26th, Jeff Roussel, our VP of Sales, is going to be doing a webinar. And next week on my blog, I'm going to be publishing a podcast that Jeff and I did, because Jeff is, I think, very uniquely positioned to talk about trends with lean and continuous improvement, because he talks to a lot of organizations and a lot of industries about the things they're struggling with. So I think that podcast, that webinar, that more presentation style webinar, hopefully will be of interest to people too.
Yeah, so what I found interesting, and when we realized that Jeff has probably talked to more organizations than most people in the lean world, because if you think about at KaiNexus, we have over 70 customers now, and you can kind of understand that in order to get one customer, you sometimes have to talk to 10 customers. So, I mean, just in those numbers itself, we estimate that Jeff may have had conversations with over 1,000 different companies over the last 4 years. And so it's really interesting to see the patterns and the trends. And I feel like we've really kind of put together a really nice story on kind of the traits and the hows and the whats, and so I'm really looking forward to that. Separate topic, and one that you may not be aware of, but I did a separate podcast that will get on the KaiNexus podcast series, Mark, about with my good friend and a local dermatologist here in Austin, Dr. Colby Evans. And Dr. Evans is, aside from being a thought leader and very well published, and also an industry leader in psoriasis, he has gotten very interested in drug pricing, and it was a fascinating conversation that we'll be putting also in a couple-part blog series that you should definitely check out, Mark. We should be getting that online here in the next couple of weeks. So maybe our next topic should be about malpractice. So
yeah. I would encourage people, also you can go to kainexus.com/podcasts to learn more about that. We've got a question that came from Mark